I was 64 years old when my own son tried to kill me. It happened on a Tuesday morning in October, over a cup of coffee in my Beacon Hill living room. The woman who saved my life? My housekeeper, Martha. The woman who tried to end it? My daughter-in-law, Amber, who smiled while serving me poison with a side of almond croissants. My name is Joyce Lewis, and this is how a spilled cup of coffee saved my life and exposed a betrayal I never saw coming. The morning started like any other since my husband Robert died 15 years ago. I woke at 6:30, patted downstairs in my silk robe, and found Martha already in the kitchen preparing my coffee. The same Colombian roast Robert had loved, the same blue porcelain cup from my mother's collection, the same ritual we'd performed together for 20 years. "Good morning, Mrs. Lewis," Martha said, pouring carefully. She was 52, quiet and competent, with salt and pepper hair pulled back in her usual neat bun. "Morning, Martha. You're here early." "Mr. Scott called about the family meeting this morning. I wanted everything ready." Right. Scott had mentioned wanting to discuss succession planning for Lewis Manufacturing, the company Robert built, and I'd somehow grown from $4 million to $12 million over 15 years. My son had joined the business 5 years ago as VP of Operations. His wife Amber came on 2 years later as Marketing Director. The perfect family business. I carried my coffee to the living room and settled into Robert's leather chair. I still thought of it as his. The quarterly reports on my laptop showed spectacular numbers. 3 major contracts, record profits. But I felt wrong. I'd been feeling dizzy for weeks now. Nauseous. Weak. My doctor had run tests that showed nothing. "Stress," he'd said. "You're 64, Joyce. Maybe it's time to slow down." Maybe he was right. The doorbell rang at exactly 10 o'clock. Scott stood there in a $3,000 suit, his dark hair perfectly styled, his expression unreadable. "Mom," he kissed my cheek, brief, perfunctory. "You look tired." When had my warm, loving boy become this cold stranger? "Come in, sweetheart. Coffee?" "Amber's bringing some from that new place on Newberry Street. She knows you like trying new blends." That should have been my first warning. I had Martha. I had coffee. Why would Amber bring outside coffee to a business meeting? Scott spread legal documents across the coffee table. "Our lawyers advised having everything in writing. Liability concerns." "Lawyers? Scott, this is just a family. Nothing's just anything with a $12 million company, Mom." 15 minutes later, Amber swept in. She was 35 and effortlessly beautiful. Blonde waves, cream Chanel blazer, pearl earrings catching the light. She carried a white bakery box and an insulated coffee carrier. "Joyce!" She hugged me, her hands trembling slightly. "I brought almond croissants from Flour and this amazing Ethiopian blend. Single origin, hints of blueberry and dark chocolate." She handed me a cup, my blue porcelain cup. "How did you know to bring this cup?" I asked. "I grabbed it from the kitchen on my way in. I know it's your favorite." Except Martha never let anyone else handle my coffee service. In 20 years. Never. Amber positioned herself on the sofa, watching both Scott and me with an intensity that felt like anticipation. I took a sip. The coffee tasted wrong, bitter, with a metallic aftertaste. "So," I said, setting it down. "Succession planning?" Scott leaned forward. "Amber and I think it's time for you to step back from day-to-day operations. Enjoy your retirement. Travel. You've earned it." "I still feel capable of running the company. The numbers this quarter—" "Dad built this company," Scott interrupted. "But he's been gone 15 years, Mom. Maybe it's time to let go." The word stung. Let go. As if Robert's legacy meant nothing. As if my 15 years of work was nothing. I reached for the coffee again, my hand feeling strangely heavy. "What exactly are you proposing?" "We've had lawyers draw up transition documents." Scott slid papers toward me. "Gradual transfer of authority. You'd stay on the board, but Amber and I would handle operations." My vision blurred at the edges. "I need to review these carefully." "Of course," Amber said quickly. "But finish your coffee first. You look pale, Joyce. Are you feeling all right?" That's when Martha appeared. Martha materialized beside my chair carrying a tray of silverware, completely unnecessary at that moment. "Mrs. Lewis, I just need to—" She leaned over and stumbled. Not dramatically, just a small, perfectly timed loss of balance that knocked my arm. Coffee splashed across my robe and onto the rug. As she knelt to clean it, she looked directly into my eyes and whispered, "Don't drink anymore. Just trust me." 20 years together, and Martha had never been clumsy. Never. "Martha, how careless!" Amber's voice was sharp. "That cup was from Joyce's mother's collection." "It's all right," I managed. "Accidents happen." But this wasn't an accident. The urgency in Martha's eyes told me that. "Here," Amber said, already moving. "Let me share mine. You've barely had any." She lifted her cup to pour. Martha stumbled again. This time she bumped Amber's arm directly. Coffee exploded everywhere, on Amber's blazer, across the sofa, all over Scott's legal documents. "Martha!" Scott shouted. "What the hell is wrong with you?" "I'm so sorry, Mr. Lewis. I don't know what—" But when Martha glanced at me, I saw relief in her eyes. Triumph, even. "Maybe we should postpone this," Amber said, staring at the coffee-stained papers. Her voice sounded strange. Distant. "Actually, I'd like to see those papers now," I said. "Coffee stains and all." Scott hesitated. "They're difficult to read." "I'll manage." As I reached for them, I watched Amber. My charming daughter-in-law's hand was shaking so badly she could barely hold her cup. This woman who could handle million-dollar presentations without breaking a sweat. "Amber, are you feeling all right?" "Just tired," she said, but her face was flushing. Sweat beaded on her forehead. "Actually, I need to lie down." She tried to stand. Her legs buckled. She collapsed onto the sofa, skin pale and clammy. Everything spinning. Then her body went rigid, and she began to convulse. I'll never forget what happened next. Her back arched, her hands clenched. A terrible sound came from her throat. Violent spasms, eyes rolling back, foam at her mouth. "Call 911!" someone shouted. Scott dropped beside her. "Amber! Baby, stay with me!" But even in my shock, I noticed something. Scott's panic seemed performed, rehearsed. His voice had the right words, but his eyes were wrong, calculating. The paramedics arrived. I heard their urgent voices. Possible toxic ingestion, BP dropping, arsenic, arsenic. I looked at Martha standing by the doorway. She wasn't surprised. She was watching Scott with grim satisfaction. And I knew. The coffee had been poisoned. Martha had known. She'd spilled it to save me. And Amber had just been poisoned by her own weapon. But why would she drink it herself? In the ambulance, Scott held Amber's hand. "You're going to be okay, baby." But his voice sounded rehearsed, like he'd practiced these exact words. I kept replaying the morning. Amber bringing coffee, insisting I drink it, trying to share hers when mine was spilled. And then, during the cleanup chaos, I'd seen Scott lean close to Amber, whisper something. Her face had looked uncertain, almost afraid. Then she'd reached for her own cup. Oh God, had Scott switched the cups? At Boston General, a doctor met us in the waiting area. "Your wife has been poisoned with arsenic," Dr. Morrison said. "A significant dose, fatal without immediate treatment. The police have been notified." "What could she have consumed?" the doctor asked. "Just coffee," Scott said quickly. "From Café Noir on Newbury Street. But my mother had the same coffee and she's fine." Except I wasn't fine. I'd drunk just enough to make me dizzy. I'd only drunk that much because I hadn't known to be afraid. Not until Martha's whispered warning. "We'll need to test any remaining coffee," Dr. Morrison said. I saw Scott's jaw tighten. After the doctor left, Scott pulled out his phone. "I should call Martha. Have her clean up before—" "Before what?" He looked at me sharply. "Before the police see the mess." "Actually," I said, "I think we should leave everything exactly as it is. The evidence might help find who poisoned Amber." Scott stared at me. In his eyes, my son's eyes, I saw cold calculation. Fine. I need to make calls. He walked away, phone at his ear. It's not going according to plan. Yes, both of them. We need to be careful. I stepped outside and called Martha. She answered immediately. Mrs. Lewis, how is Mrs. Amber? Alive, barely. My voice cracked. Martha, what do you know? Silence. Then not over the phone. Can you meet me? Brennan's coffee shop on Commonwealth, 20 minutes. Martha, are you saying what I think? I'm saying I've been watching Mrs. Amber put poison in your coffee for 6 weeks. I'm saying I couldn't watch anymore. I have proof, Mrs. Lewis. Photos, recordings, everything. The line went dead. 6 weeks. Amber had been slowly poisoning me for 6 weeks, building up arsenic in my system. Today was supposed to be the final dose. I walked back inside. Scott was with a man in an expensive suit. Mom, this is James Hartley, our family attorney. Given the situation, I thought we needed legal representation. He'd already called a lawyer, which meant he already knew he'd need one. My phone buzzed. Martha. At Brennan's, police need to see what I have. I looked at my son, my only child, and felt something break inside me. I need air, I said. Call me if there's news. As I walked away, I heard Scott tell his lawyer, that housekeeper's been unstable for months. If she's saying things... But I didn't stop. Martha had saved my life, and whatever she had to show me, I had a feeling nothing would ever be the same again. The woman I'd trusted with my business had been slowly killing me with coffee and smiles, and my son, my precious boy who used to bring me dandelions, had known all along. Maybe he'd planned it himself. I was about to find out. 20 minutes later, I sat across from Martha in a dimly lit corner booth at Brennan's. The irony wasn't lost on me, discussing poisoned coffee while surrounded by the rich aroma of espresso and cinnamon. Martha looked like she'd aged 5 years in the past 5 hours. Her hands trembled as she pulled a small spiral notebook from her purse. I should have told you sooner, she said without preamble. But I wasn't sure at first, and then I was terrified you wouldn't believe me. Tell me now. She opened the notebook. Pages of neat handwriting, dates, times, observations. 6 weeks ago, Mrs. Amber started arriving early on mornings when you had business meetings. Martha's voice was steady now, no longer the frightened housekeeper. At first, I thought she was being helpful, but then you started getting sick on those mornings. Only those mornings. She flipped through the pages, showing me her careful documentation. Every morning, Amber had helped with coffee, every symptom I'd experienced afterward. So I started watching her. Martha pulled out her phone. And 3 weeks ago, I saw this. She showed me a photograph. Amber in my kitchen, reaching into her designer handbag. Another photo, Amber standing over my blue porcelain cup, a small dark vial in her hand. A third, Amber stirring my coffee with an expression of cold concentration. My stomach turned. 3 weeks. You've known for 3 weeks. I was afraid, Mrs. Lewis. Tears filled Martha's eyes. Mr. Scott had already warned me twice about being too nosy. He said I should focus on my job and stop asking questions about the business. I was terrified that if I accused his wife without enough proof, he'd fire me and make sure I could never work again. So you kept documenting. Every morning she came early, I documented. Every time you felt sick, I wrote it down. And then this morning, Martha's voice dropped to a whisper. I heard her on the phone with Mr. Scott. She said, everything will be finished today. Triple the usual dose. Triple. They'd been building up the arsenic in my system for weeks, making me weaker, making my eventual death look like natural causes. And today was the killing blow. There's more, Martha said, flipping to another section. I found documents in your study. Life insurance policies on you. 5 of them, totaling $5 million, all taken out in the past year. $5 million, on top of the $12 million company. And bank records, she continued. Mr. Scott has been transferring money from business accounts. I saw at least $300,000 moved into accounts only he can access. $300,000, I repeated numbly. He was stealing from the company while planning to inherit it. Mrs. Lewis. Martha reached across the table and gripped my hand. I have something else. Recordings. My heart stopped. Recordings? I've been carrying my phone in my apron pocket. When I heard them talking in your study or the living room, I recorded them, just in case, just to have proof. She pulled up an audio file. This was 3 weeks ago. She pressed play. Amber's voice, clear and cold. 6 more weeks of small doses, then the final one. She'll think it's a heart attack. Scott's voice. You're sure it won't show up in autopsy? She's 64, recently stressed, has been having health issues, natural causes. No one will question it. And that nosy housekeeper? Fire her the next day. She's too expensive anyway. I felt like I'd been punched in the chest. My son's voice, casually discussing my murder. Martha played another recording. This one from 2 weeks ago. Scott. Sometimes I wonder if I can trust you. If you'd betray me like you're betraying Mom. Amber. Scott, don't be paranoid. I love you. Scott, prove it. When the time comes, I want you to drink from Mom's cup first, just to show me you're committed. Long pause. Amber. What? That's insane. Scott. If you really love me, you'll trust me. I'll switch the cups at the last second, but I need to know you'd do anything for me. Another pause. Then Amber quietly. Okay. If it proves I love you. I stared at Martha, my mind reeling. He was planning to kill her too. Yes, ma'am, I think so. But I don't understand. This morning, did he actually switch the cups? Martha's expression was grim. I think he let her drink the poison, Mrs. Lewis. I think he wanted her to take the fall. The pieces clicked into horrible place. Scott had convinced Amber to drink from my cup first as a test of loyalty. He'd promised to switch them, but when Martha spilled my coffee and Amber tried to share hers, Scott had let her drink the poisoned one, his own wife. My son was planning to kill both of us. We need to take this to the police, I said. Now. Detective Sarah Walsh was a woman in her mid-40s with sharp eyes and the kind of calm demeanor that came from years of seeing the worst humanity had to offer. She listened to everything, looked at every photo, listened to every recording. When the last audio file finished playing, she sat back in her chair. Mrs. Lewis, what you've just described is systematic attempted murder. And if these recordings are authentic, which we'll verify, you have a very strong case. What happens now? I asked. Now we get search warrants for your son's home, office, and vehicles. We'll need to test the remaining coffee from this morning, and we'll need your permission to search your house. You have it, whatever you need. Walsh made notes. Mrs. Sullivan, you may have saved Mrs. Lewis's life, but I need to be honest. You could have been killed yourself. If they'd discovered you were documenting... I know, Martha said quietly, but I couldn't just watch her die. Walsh nodded with respect. Then she looked at me. Mrs. Lewis, I need to prepare you. When we arrest your son, this is going to become very public. The media will have a field day with this. Wealthy family, murder plot, poisoned coffee. Are you ready for that? Was I ready? Ready to watch my son be arrested on the news? Ready to have strangers dissect my family's destruction? But what choice did I have? I'm ready, I said. The police moved fast. By that evening, search teams were at Scott and Amber's Brookline mansion, at Scott's office at Lewis Manufacturing, at my Beacon Hill house. Detective Walsh called me at my hotel room. I checked into the Four Seasons, unable to face going home, with updates. We found the life insurance policies, 5 of them, just like your housekeeper said. Total value, $5 million. And the bank transfers? Over $300,000 moved from Lewis Manufacturing accounts into a personal account controlled solely by your son. We also found evidence he was planning to liquidate major company assets after your death. My company, Robert's legacy. Scott was planning to destroy it all for quick cash. There's more, Walsh continued. We found a vial of arsenic solution in Amber Lewis's desk at your company offices, hidden in a locked drawer. The lab is testing it now, but it appears to be pharmaceutical grade. Pharmaceutical grade. Amber's background was in pharmaceutical sales. She'd known exactly what she was doing. We're arresting your son tonight, Walsh said gently. I wanted you to hear it from me first. Thank you, Detective. Mrs. Lewis, I'm sorry. I know this can't be easy. Easy. Nothing about discovering your only child is a murderer is easy. They arrested Scott at the hospital at 9 p.m. I wasn't there, but I saw it on the 11 o'clock news. My son in handcuffs, his face twisted with rage and humiliation, being led out of Boston General by 2 officers while reporters shouted questions. The headline, "Local businessman arrested in wife's poisoning." The story would break wide open by morning. But tonight, I sat alone in my hotel room, holding a photograph of Scott as a little boy. 5 years old, gap-toothed smile, holding a fistful of dandelions he'd picked for me. "You're the best mommy in the whole world," he'd said that day. When had that little boy become a monster? My phone rang, a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer. "Mom," Scott's voice calling from jail. "Mom, please, you have to listen to me." Every instinct told me to hang up, but I couldn't. "I'm listening. This is all a terrible misunderstanding. That crazy woman Martha has filled your head with lies. Amber and I would never hurt you. We love you." "Scott, stop." "Mom, please. I've heard the recording, Scott. I've seen the evidence. I know what you did." Silence, long and heavy. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. Cold, hard. "You can't prove anything. It's your word against ours. And Amber's the one in the hospital. If anyone looks guilty here, it's you. Is that really how you want to play this? Accuse your own mother? I want to protect my family from false accusations. Martha was fired for theft last year. Did you know that? She has every reason to want revenge. It was a lie. Martha had never been fired, never stolen anything. Scott, I've already talked to the police. I've told them everything." "Then you've made a terrible mistake." His voice was ice. "A mistake that's going to destroy this family. This family was destroyed the moment you decided I was worth more to you dead than alive." I hung up before he could respond, and I cried. For the son I'd lost, for the family that had never really existed, for the 15 years I'd spent building a legacy for a child who only wanted to cash it out. The next morning, Detective Walsh called again. "Mrs. Lewis, our computer forensics team found something on Amber Lewis's laptop. Something you need to see." She came to my hotel room with a printout, a spreadsheet titled Future Prospects. I scanned the columns: names, ages, net worth, health status, family relationships. Eleanor Hartford, 71, widow, 8 Nellers, estranged daughter. Richard Pembroke, 68, widower, 5M, no children. Margaret Saunders, 73, divorced, 4M, distant son. 12 names total, all elderly, all wealthy, all with complicated family relationships. "I know these people," I whispered. "They're my friends, business associates." "We believe," Walsh said carefully, "that your son and daughter-in-law were planning to repeat this scheme. After your death, they would befriend these individuals, gain their trust, and kill them too." My voice sounded distant to my own ears. "We weren't victims. We were practice." Walsh nodded grimly. "There are also research notes, successful poisoning cases, inheritance fraud methods, how to avoid suspicion." This was methodical, Mrs. Lewis. Planned. I stared at the names of my friends, people I'd known for decades, people Scott and Amber had been planning to murder. "Detective Walsh," I said, my voice steady despite the horror. "I'll testify. I'll face Scott in court. I'll do whatever it takes to make sure he never hurts anyone else. The DA will want to offer Amber a plea deal. She'll claim Scott manipulated her, that she was afraid of him. Don't let her take it. She was an equal partner in this. The recordings prove that." Walsh studied me. "You're sure? Trials are brutal, especially when it's family." "I'm sure. This isn't just about me anymore. It's about protecting everyone on that list. Everyone they plan to kill next." Walsh nodded with respect. "Then let's make sure they never get the chance." As she left, I looked at the spreadsheet again. 12 potential victims. 12 people who had no idea they'd been targeted. Scott and Amber hadn't just tried to kill me. They'd been building a business model out of murder. My son, the boy who used to bring me flowers and promised to take care of me, had become a serial killer in waiting. And now it was time to make sure the world knew exactly what he was capable of. That night, alone in my hotel room, I allowed myself to fully feel the weight of what I was about to do. I was going to testify against my own son, send him to prison for life. Part of me, the mother part, wanted to find excuses. He was desperate. He had debts. Amber manipulated him. But the recordings didn't lie. Scott's voice, casually discussing my death, planning to poison his own wife, researching other victims. This wasn't desperation. This was calculated evil. I pulled out my phone and looked at old photos. Scott's childhood, his high school graduation, his wedding day. In every photo, I searched for the moment when love had turned to greed, when my son had become someone who could plan his mother's murder. But I couldn't find it. Maybe it had always been there, hidden behind smiles and hugs and promises. Or maybe people change in ways we can never fully understand. My phone buzzed. "Martha, are you okay, Mrs. Lewis?" I typed back, "As okay as I can be. Thank you for being brave, Martha. You saved my life." "You gave me a life worth saving, ma'am. Get some rest." I set down the phone and looked out at the Boston skyline. Somewhere out there, Scott sat in a jail cell. Tomorrow, he'd be formally charged. Next week, the grand jury would indict him. And in a few months, I'd sit in a courtroom and tell the world what my son had done. It would be the hardest thing I'd ever do. But Martha had risked everything to save me. I owed it to her, and to all the potential victims on that spreadsheet, to finish what she'd started. My son had tried to poison my coffee and steal my life, but I was still here, still breathing, still fighting, and I was going to make sure justice was served. Even if it broke what was left of my heart, the next 6 months were a blur of legal preparations, depositions, evidence reviews, meetings with prosecutors. Martha and I gave statements dozens of times. Each retelling made the betrayal feel both more real and more surreal. And then, finally, the day arrived. The day I would face my son in court. Suffolk County Superior Court was packed on the first day of trial. I sat in the front row, Martha beside me, as my son was led into the courtroom in an orange jumpsuit. Scott had lost weight in jail. His expensive suits were gone, replaced by prison clothes that made him look smaller, diminished. But when our eyes met, I saw no remorse, only cold calculation. Amber entered separately, under guard. Her blonde hair was pulled back severely, her face pale without makeup. She kept her eyes fixed straight ahead, never once looking at me. The woman who'd smiled while poisoning my coffee for weeks couldn't even meet my gaze. Judge Patricia Harrison called the court to order. The Commonwealth versus Scott Lewis and Amber Lewis. Charges of conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder, embezzlement, and insurance fraud. Scott's attorney, James Hartley, stood for his opening statement. He was everything you'd expect from a high-priced defense lawyer. Silver hair, expensive suit, practiced gravitas. "Ladies and gentlemen," Hartley began, "this is a case about a troubled young man who fell under the influence of a manipulative woman with a background in chemistry and a talent for psychological control." I watched Scott's face as his lawyer painted him as a victim. There was no shame there, no recognition that he was throwing his own wife under the bus to save himself. Amber Lewis preyed on Scott's insecurities about his inheritance, Hartley continued. She convinced him that his mother was planning to disinherit him, that desperate action was necessary to secure their future. District Attorney Margaret Reynolds objected immediately. "Your Honor, there's no evidence Mrs. Lewis ever planned to change her will." Sustained. The jury will disregard that statement. But the damage was done. Hartley was planting seeds of doubt, suggesting I'd somehow driven my son to attempted murder. Reynolds stood for her opening. She was in her 50s, sharp-eyed, with the kind of intensity that came from prosecuting evil for decades. The evidence will show, she said, her voice clear and strong, that Scott Lewis and Amber Lewis engaged in a systematic, premeditated plan to murder Joyce Lewis for financial gain. You'll hear recordings of them planning her death. You'll see evidence they were preparing to murder others. This wasn't desperation. This was calculated, cold-blooded greed. The trial began. Dr. Richard Torres, the forensic toxicologist, testified first. Mrs. Lewis's blood work showed arsenic levels consistent with chronic low-dose poisoning over approximately 6 weeks, he explained. The final dose, the one Mrs. Amber Lewis consumed, would have been fatal to Mrs. Joyce Lewis within 3 hours. How close did Mrs. Lewis come to death? Reynolds asked. If she'd consumed the full cup of coffee that morning, she would have died before reaching the hospital. I felt Martha's hand squeeze mine. Martha took the stand next. She was nervous, hands trembling slightly, voice quiet at first. But as she described 20 years of service, her loyalty to me, her growing suspicions about Amber, her voice grew stronger. I saw Mrs. Amber put drops from a small vial into Mrs. Lewis's coffee, Martha testified. I started documenting everything. Dates, times, symptoms Mrs. Lewis experienced. Reynolds entered Martha's notebook and photographs into evidence. The jury leaned forward, studying images of Amber standing over my coffee cup, vial in hand, her face cold with concentration. "Why didn't you report this immediately?" Reynolds asked. "I was afraid. Mr. Scott had already warned me twice about being too curious. I knew if I accused them without proof, I'd lose my job and Mrs. Lewis might not believe me." Martha's voice cracked. "So I kept documenting, and when I heard Mrs. Amber say triple the dose that morning, I knew I had to act." "What did you do?" "I spilled the coffee, and I whispered to Mrs. Lewis not to drink it." "You saved her life." "I tried to, ma'am. I just did what was right." Hartley's cross-examination tried to paint Martha as vindictive, jealous, lying. But Martha held firm. 20 years of quiet competence and unshakable loyalty showed in every answer. The jury believed her. I could see it in their faces. Then came the moment everything changed. Reynolds played the recordings Martha had made. The courtroom fell silent except for the voices of my son and daughter-in-law, casually discussing my murder. The first recording, Amber. 6 more weeks of small doses, then the final one. She'll think it's a heart attack. Scott. You're sure it won't show up in autopsy? Amber. She's 64, stressed, recently sick, natural causes. No one will question it. Several jurors looked physically ill. Then the second recording, the one that destroyed any sympathy for Scott. Scott. Sometimes I wonder if you'd betray me like you're betraying Mom. Amber. Scott, don't be paranoid. Scott. Prove it. When the time comes, drink from Mom's cup first. Show me you're committed. Amber. Long pause. You'll switch the cups like you promised? Scott. Pause. Of course, baby. I love you. Reynolds stopped the recording. The silence in the courtroom was deafening. Ladies and gentlemen, she said quietly, listen to that pause before Scott Lewis says, of course. That's the pause of a man lying. A man who never intended to switch those cups. She turned to face Amber at the defense table. Scott Lewis didn't just plan to kill his mother. He planned to kill his wife and frame her for the murder. Amber's face had gone white. That's not, she whispered. He promised. Her lawyer tried to quiet her, but Amber stood up, trembling. You were going to let me die? She turned to Scott, her voice rising. You were going to let me drink the poison? Make it look like I killed your mother? Sit down, Amber, Scott said coldly. You never loved me. You were going to kill me too. Mrs. Lewis, please, her lawyer begged. But Amber was beyond control. 6 months of believing Scott had protected her, that they were partners, shattered in that moment. He planned it all, she screamed. He said we'd be together forever. He said... Judge Harrison slammed her gavel. Order! Mrs. Lewis, sit down or you'll be removed. Amber collapsed into her chair, sobbing. Her lawyer looked stunned. And Scott? Scott sat perfectly still, his face a mask of cold indifference. The jury had just watched Amber realize her husband had tried to murder her, and they'd watched Scott show no emotion at all. Reynolds let the moment breathe. Then she played the final recording, Amber and Scott the morning of the poisoning. Amber: triple the dose. She'll have cardiac arrest in 2 hours. Scott: and you remember our agreement? You drink first? Amber: you'll swap the cups. Scott, long pause. I love you, Amber. Reynolds faced the jury. That pause, that's not love, that's calculation. Scott Lewis was already planning his wife's death while she planned his mother's murder. After the break, Reynolds presented the computer evidence, the spreadsheet with 12 names: elderly people, wealthy people, vulnerable people. Scott and Amber Lewis weren't just planning to kill Joyce Lewis, Reynolds told the jury. They were building a business model out of murder. 12 potential victims, 12 families who would have been destroyed. The jury looked at Scott with undisguised horror. When they called me to the stand, my legs shook as I walked to the witness box. I'd been preparing for this moment for months, but nothing could prepare you for looking at your only child and testifying about how he tried to kill you. Reynolds began gently. Mrs. Lewis, tell us about your relationship with your son. I took a breath. Scott was a loving child, thoughtful, kind. After his father died, he promised to take care of me. My voice cracked. I believed him. When did you start feeling ill? About 2 months before the incident. Dizzy, weak, confused. My doctor found nothing wrong. Because you were being poisoned. Yes. Reynolds showed me photos of Scott as a child. Scott at his college graduation. Scott's wedding day. When did the boy in these photos become someone who could plan your murder? I don't know, I whispered. I've asked myself that question every day for 6 months. I don't know when I lost my son. What would you say to him now if you could? I turned to look at Scott directly. Our eyes met. I would have given you everything, I said, my voice stronger now. Not just money, my love, my pride, my trust. You didn't have to kill me. You just had to ask. Scott's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. The company was always going to be yours, I continued. I was planning to retire in 2 years, but you couldn't wait. You chose murder over patience, greed over love. Objection, Hartley said weakly. Overruled. Continue, Mrs. Lewis. I kept my eyes on Scott. You didn't just try to kill my body. You killed my faith in family, in unconditional love. You made me afraid to trust anyone. For just a moment, something flickered in Scott's eyes. Shame? Regret? But it disappeared as quickly as it came. Do you forgive him? Reynolds asked. I forgive him because carrying hatred would poison me worse than any arsenic. But I'll never trust him again, and I'll never pretend what he did was anything less than evil. The jury deliberated for 4 days. 4 days of waiting. 4 days of replaying every moment of the trial in my mind. 4 days of wondering if 12 strangers would believe the evidence or fall for Hartley's manipulation narrative. On day 4, my phone rang. Detective Walsh. They have a verdict. The courtroom was even more packed than opening day. Martha sat beside me, her hand gripping mine. Judge Harrison addressed the jury foreman. Have you reached a verdict? We have, Your Honor. On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder in the first degree, how do you find the defendant, Scott Lewis? Guilty. The word hit me like a physical blow. On the charge of attempted murder in the first degree? Guilty. Embezzlement? Guilty. Insurance fraud? Guilty. Scott's shoulders sagged, but his face remained blank. The verdicts for Amber were identical. Guilty on all counts. Judge Harrison scheduled sentencing for the following week. I didn't attend the sentencing hearing. I couldn't bear to watch. But Detective Walsh called me afterward. Life without possibility of parole, she said. Both of them. Judge Harrison said their crimes showed calculated depravity and complete absence of human empathy. Life without parole. Scott would die in prison. The little boy who'd brought me dandelions was gone forever. Mrs. Lewis, are you all right? No, I said honestly. But I will be. The months after the trial were the hardest. The media attention slowly faded, but the pain didn't. I had to rebuild my life piece by piece, selling the house, restructuring the company, learning to trust again. Martha never left my side, and somewhere along the way, grief transformed into purpose. 2 years later, I stood at a ribbon-cutting ceremony in Wellesley. The building was beautiful, modern glass and warm brick, surrounded by gardens. A sign over the entrance read, Martha Sullivan Center for Elder Abuse Prevention. Martha stood beside me, now 54 herself, tears streaming down her face. I can't believe you named it after me, she whispered. You saved my life, Martha. This seemed like the least I could do. The Lewis Foundation had grown beyond my expectations. In 2 years, we'd helped 89 victims of elder abuse, recovered millions in stolen assets, put 17 abusers in prison. Every case reminded me that Scott and Amber weren't unique, but every case we solved also reminded me that people like Martha existed, people willing to stand up for what's right. I'd sold the Beacon Hill house, too many poisoned memories. Martha and I lived in a colonial in Wellesley now, her in the guest house, though the distinction between guest and family had long since disappeared. We shared coffee every morning, a ritual that had become sacred. Every cup a reminder that I was alive, that love could still be trusted when it came from the right people. That evening, alone in my study, I found an envelope that had been forwarded from my old address. Scott's handwriting. For a moment, I considered burning it unread, but curiosity won. Inside was a single page. Mom, I know you'll never forgive me. I don't expect you to. But I need you to know that somewhere, buried deep, the boy who loved you still exists. He's ashamed. He's broken. He knows he destroyed the best thing in his life for money he'll never spend. I don't expect your forgiveness. I just wanted you to know I'm sorry. Scott. I read it twice, searching for genuine remorse, searching for my son. But all I found were words, and words I'd learned were cheap. I walked to the fireplace and dropped the letter into the flames. Martha appeared in the doorway. Was that from him? Yes. Did you read it? I did. I watched the paper curl and blacken. He said he was sorry. Do you believe him? I believe he's sorry he got caught, sorry he's in prison, but truly sorry for trying to kill me? I shook my head. No, I don't think he's capable of that kind of remorse. Martha brought me a cup of coffee, our evening ritual. Here's to the coffee that saved your life. I smiled and raised my cup. Here's to the woman who made sure I could drink many more. We sat together in comfortable silence, watching the letter burn to ash. Scott had tried to poison my faith in humanity along with my coffee. He'd almost succeeded. But Martha had shown me something more powerful than betrayal. She'd shown me that loyalty, courage, and love still existed, sometimes in the most unexpected places. The boy who'd brought me dandelions was gone, but I'd found a new family, a chosen family, built not on blood or obligation, but on mutual respect, genuine care, and the simple courage to do what's right, even when it cost you everything. At 66, I was more alive than I'd been at 64. I knew who I could trust and why trust was worth the risk. And every morning when Martha and I shared coffee and planned another day of helping victims find justice, I celebrated the simple miracle of being alive. The coffee that was meant to kill me had become a symbol of survival, and that was the sweetest victory of all.